Go to your room, old woman." The words landed in my dining room with the force of a gunshot. For a moment, nobody moved. Not me, not my daughter, not even my son-in-law Kevin, who seemed surprised by how loud his own voice had sounded. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked. The roast chicken on the table filled the room with the smell of rosemary and garlic. Outside, a light rain tapped against the windows of the house my late husband and I had spent 38 years paying for. My house, the house where my daughter had taken her first steps, the house where my husband had taken his last breath. And now a man who had never paid a single mortgage payment was pointing toward the hallway like he was disciplining a child. "Go to your room, old woman." I looked at him. Then I looked at my daughter. Emily lowered her eyes to her plate. That hurt more than Kevin's words. Much more, because insults from strangers bounce off you. Silence from your own child sinks straight into your heart. Nobody spoke. Kevin shifted in his chair. I could see a hint of embarrassment crossing his face, but not enough to stop him. Not enough to apologize. The silence stretched. Finally, he shrugged. "Well," he said. I stared at him. 62 years old, retired Army colonel. Widow, mother, grandmother. A woman who had spent decades leading soldiers, comforting grieving families, and rebuilding her life after losing the love of her life. And somehow I had ended up sitting in my own dining room being spoken to like a burden. I slowly placed my napkin beside my plate. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I expected anger. Instead, I felt something colder, something clearer. The moment you finally stop making excuses. I stood. Margaret Emily began. I looked at her. She stopped talking. Maybe she saw something in my face. Maybe she realized something had changed. I picked up my purse from the chair. No dramatic speech. No shouting. No tears. Just a quiet decision. I walked toward the front door. Behind me, I heard Kevin laugh nervously. "Oh, come on," he said. "Don't be so dramatic." I didn't answer. I opened the door. The cool Ohio evening air hit my face. Then I stepped outside. And neither of them followed me. Not my daughter. Not my son-in-law. Neither one. That was how I knew it wasn't just about one sentence. It hadn't been about one sentence for a very long time. I sat in my car for nearly 10 minutes before starting the engine. The rain had become heavier. Streetlights reflected across the windshield in long, golden streaks. I gripped the steering wheel and stared at the house. Every window glowed warmly. From the outside, it looked like a happy family home. Most painful things do. I finally backed out of the driveway. As I drove through town, memories kept surfacing. Emily riding her bicycle down Maple Street. My husband Richard carrying Christmas decorations into the garage. Summer cookouts. Birthday parties. College graduations. A lifetime compressed into a few miles of road. I pulled into a small roadside motel just outside town. Nothing fancy. The kind of place retired travelers use when they're driving across state lines. The woman at the front desk smiled kindly. "Just one night?" she asked. I hesitated. "One night," I replied. At the time, I believed it. The room was small but clean. A bed, a television, a coffee maker, silence, beautiful silence. I set my purse on the dresser and sat on the edge of the mattress. For the first time all evening, I allowed myself to cry. Not loudly, just enough to release the pressure building behind my ribs. I wasn't crying because Kevin had insulted me. I was crying because Emily hadn't defended me. That distinction matters. People often think betrayal comes from enemies. Most of the time, it comes from people we love. I eventually washed my face and changed into pajamas. Sleep should have come easily. Instead, my mind replayed years of small moments. Moments I had ignored. Kevin rolling his eyes when I spoke. Kevin rearranging furniture without asking. Kevin referring to my house as our house. Kevin making decisions and informing me afterward. And Emily always staying quiet. Always choosing comfort over confrontation. Always promising we'd talk later. Later never came. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. Emily. I stared at the screen. Let it ring. Then ring again. And again. Finally, the calls stopped. A text message appeared. "Mom, please come home. Kevin didn't mean it." I laughed softly. Not because it was funny, because it was familiar. He didn't mean it. He was stressed. He's having a hard time. You know how he is. For years, I had accepted those explanations. Tonight, I couldn't anymore. I set the phone down. An hour later, another message arrived. "Mom, can we talk tomorrow?" I didn't answer. Instead, I turned off the lamp. The room fell dark. Outside, rain continued tapping against the window. I lay awake listening to it, thinking, remembering, questioning myself. Had I somehow allowed this to happen? Had my desire to keep peace created this situation? The answer was uncomfortable. Yes, not entirely, but partly. Every ignored insult teaches people what you'll tolerate. Every avoided conversation becomes permission. I understood that now. Around 4 a.m, I finally fell asleep. When I woke, pale sunlight was slipping through the curtains. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then everything came rushing back. The dinner table, Kevin's voice, Emily's silence. The front door closing behind me. I sat up slowly. My body felt tired. My mind felt strangely calm. A feeling settled over me that I hadn't experienced in years. Clarity. Not anger, not revenge. Clarity. I showered, dressed, made a cup of terrible motel coffee. Then I picked up my phone. There was only one person I wanted to call. Someone I'd trusted for more than 30 years. Someone who understood both loyalty and boundaries. Someone who would tell me the truth whether I liked it or not. My old military friend, Frank Sullivan. I stared at his name for several seconds. Then I pressed the call button. As the phone rang, I looked out the motel window at the gray Ohio morning. The moment felt strangely important, like standing at the edge of a bridge before crossing it. Frank answered on the second ring. "Margaret." "Good morning, Frank." A pause. Then his voice changed. "What's wrong?" I took a deep breath. And for the first time, I told someone exactly what had happened. What's wrong? Frank Sullivan had known me for more than 30 years. We had served together during 2 overseas deployments. He had attended my retirement ceremony. He had stood beside me at Richard's funeral. He knew my voice well enough to recognize trouble before I said a single word. I sat at the small table in the motel room and stared out the window. "Kevin told me to go to my room," I said. Silence. Then Frank asked carefully, "In your house?" "Yes." Another pause. "And Emily?" She said nothing. I heard him exhale slowly, the way people do when they're trying not to react too quickly. "Margaret." He said, "I think this conversation is about a lot more than last night." He was right. The truth was that Kevin's words hadn't created the problem. They had simply exposed it. For years, I'd convinced myself everything was temporary. The arrangements, the tensions, the disrespect, everything. I had been wrong. 3 years earlier, my life had looked very different. Richard had been gone for almost 2 years. The grief had softened but never disappeared. Anyone who has lost a spouse after decades together understands that. People say time heals. What time actually does is teach you how to carry the wound. Some days are lighter. Some days are heavier. The wound remains. I was living alone in the house we'd built together. The mortgage was long paid off. My military pension was comfortable. The house wasn't extravagant, but it was mine. For a while, I enjoyed the quiet. Then loneliness began creeping into places I didn't notice. Empty chairs, unused rooms, silent dinners. The sound of only one coffee cup in the morning. That's when Emily called. She sounded exhausted. Kevin's construction supply business had failed after several difficult years. Debt was piling up. Their landlord was raising rent. They needed help. Just for a little while, Mom Emily said, "A few months." I didn't hesitate. Of course I said yes. What mother wouldn't? At first, everything seemed fine. Emily and Kevin moved into the upstairs guest rooms. They promised to contribute. They helped with groceries. We shared meals. I genuinely enjoyed having people in the house again. The laughter felt good. The activity felt good. For the first time since Richard died, the place felt alive. I thought I was helping my daughter. I didn't realize I was slowly giving away pieces of my home. The first changes seemed harmless. Kevin wanted to repaint the living room. Emily thought we should move furniture around. A television appeared in the family room. Then another. Then another. None of those things bothered me much. People have different tastes. Compromise is part of family life. Or so I told myself, but the changes kept coming. One afternoon, I came home from lunch with a friend and discovered my favorite reading chair was gone. The chair Richard had bought me for our 25th anniversary. "Where is it?" I asked. Kevin barely looked up from his phone. "We moved it into storage." Storage? Like it was an old box. Not a piece of my life. Why? It didn't fit the new layout. The new layout. Not our layout. Not my layout. The new layout. I remember standing there feeling strangely uncomfortable. Not angry. Just displaced. Like a guest in my own living room. A feeling that would become increasingly familiar. Months passed. The patterns deepened. More decisions happened without me. More conversations occurred after choices had already been made. The house slowly shifted around me. One evening, I discovered they'd converted Richard's workshop into a home office. No discussion. No warning. Just a completed project. I stood in the doorway staring at it. The workbench was gone. The old tools were boxed away. Even Richard's radio had disappeared. Emily looked guilty. Kevin needed the space. I nodded. Then I walked away. What else was there to do? The problem wasn't the workshop. The problem was that nobody had thought to ask. Nobody had considered whether I might have feelings about it. That realization hurt. I began spending more time outside the house. Long walks, coffee shops, lunches with friends, volunteer work at the Veterans Center, anywhere I felt like myself. Because increasingly, I didn't feel like myself at home. I felt like an inconvenience. The strange thing about disrespect is that it rarely arrives all at once. It arrives in small installments, tiny moments, tiny dismissals, tiny assumptions. Eventually, those pieces accumulate. One day you look up and realize the relationship has changed completely. Kevin became increasingly comfortable speaking for everyone. If neighbors stopped by, he answered questions. If contractors arrived, he made decisions. If family visited, he played host. More than once, I heard him refer to the property as ours. At first, I corrected him. Later, I stopped. Because every correction created tension, and I hated tension. Especially after losing Richard, peace felt precious. I protected it too much. Frank listened quietly as I described those years. When I finished, he asked a question that stayed with me. When was the last time you truly felt at home in that house? I opened my mouth, then stopped, because I couldn't answer. Not honestly. The answer was painful. Years. It had been years. I thought about Christmas dinners where I felt like an invited guest. Birthday parties where decisions happened around me instead of with me. Conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. The subtle way Kevin acted as if my presence required accommodation. The way Emily kept smoothing things over instead of addressing them. Suddenly I understood something. The dinner confrontation hadn't happened because Kevin lost his temper. It happened because he genuinely believed he had the authority to speak that way. And people only develop that kind of confidence when boundaries disappear. I had allowed mine to disappear. Not intentionally, not overnight, but gradually. The realization wasn't pleasant, yet it was necessary. Because if I wanted things to change, I needed to stop pretending I was powerless. I wasn't powerless. I was simply avoiding conflict. There is a difference. Frank finally spoke. Margaret. Yes. Who owns the house? The question sounded almost ridiculous. You know who owns it. I want to hear you say it. I looked out the motel window again. The morning clouds were beginning to clear. The sun was pushing through. I own it, I said. Alone. Yes. No co-signers. Number. No transfers. Number. No shared deed. Number. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. Good. Good. Not because he wanted a fight, because he already understood what I was slowly beginning to realize. The situation wasn't hopeless. The situation was simply overdue. And for the first time since leaving my house, I began wondering whether I had another option. Not how to survive the disrespect, but how to stop it. Frank's voice became firm. Margaret, I think it's time we look at every document connected to that property. I sat up straighter. What do you mean? I mean every document. His tone told me this conversation was about to become something much bigger than a family argument. And for the first time in years, I felt something unfamiliar. Not fear, not sadness. Resolve. The word resolve stayed with me long after I hung up with Frank. For years, I'd convinced myself that enduring discomfort was the same thing as being patient. That keeping peace was the same thing as being kind. That avoiding conflict was somehow noble. Now sitting alone in a motel room with a cup of coffee that tasted like warm cardboard, I wasn't so sure anymore. Frank called back an hour later. Can you come to my office? Today. Yes, his tone wasn't urgent. It was focused. There was a difference. By noon, I was sitting across from him in a small law office 20 miles away. The walls were lined with military photographs and legal certificates. Frank had retired from the Army years before becoming a real estate attorney. If there was anyone I trusted with both loyalty and honesty, it was him. He handed me a bottle of water. Let's start from the beginning. For nearly 2 hours, we reviewed everything. The house deed, the property records, the homeowner's insurance, the trust documents Richard and I had prepared years earlier. Every signature, every page, every detail. The deeper we looked, the clearer things became. The house belonged entirely to me. Not partly, not eventually, not someday. Now, legally and completely. There were no hidden surprises, no shared ownership, no paperwork Kevin could point to, no loopholes. At one point, Frank leaned back in his chair. Well, what? How do you feel? I stared at the stack of papers, strangely emotional. Not because I had discovered anything new. I'd always known I owned the house. The difference was that for the first time in years, someone had placed the facts directly in front of me. Facts have a way of cutting through confusion, and confusion had become a permanent part of my life. You know what's strange, I said. What? I started acting like a guest. Frank nodded. Because they treated you like one. The answer hit harder than I expected. Because it was true. Not completely. Not at first, but gradually. Little by little. 1,000 tiny moments. 1,000 tiny concessions. Until eventually I'd stopped feeling like the owner of my own life. Frank closed the file. Then he asked a question. A simple question. One sentence. But it changed everything. Margaret, do you want your home back? The room became very quiet. Outside traffic moved past the office windows. A truck rumbled through an intersection. Somewhere a phone rang. I looked down at my hands. The skin was older now, wrinkled in places, marked by time, but they were still my hands. The same hands that had held Emily when she was born. The same hands that had saluted at military ceremonies. The same hands that had buried my husband. The same hands that had built the life I was now afraid to reclaim. Do I want my home back? The answer should have been easy, yet it wasn't. Because houses aren't just buildings. They're memories, relationships, history. And if I answered yes, I knew something would change forever. I thought about Emily, not the 40-year-old woman she was now, the little girl, the teenager, the young woman who cried when she left for college, the daughter who once called me her hero. I loved her. Nothing could change that, but love doesn't erase reality. And reality was sitting directly in front of me. I had spent years sacrificing my comfort to protect a relationship that was already deteriorating. Frank waited patiently. He knew me well enough not to rush. Finally, I lifted my head. Yes, his expression softened. Say it again. I almost laughed. Why? Because you've spent years saying the opposite. I looked him straight in the eye. Yes, I said. I want my home back. The moment the words left my mouth, something shifted inside me. Not anger, relief, pure relief. Like setting down a heavy box you didn't realize you'd been carrying. Frank nodded. Good. Then he opened a legal pad. Now we talk about options. The next hour was one of the most practical conversations I'd had in years. No emotion, no family drama, just facts, property rights, occupancy laws, notice requirements, procedures, timelines, responsibilities. Frank explained everything carefully. Nothing dramatic, nothing aggressive, just legal reality. Margaret, he said, the law isn't designed to punish people. It's designed to establish boundaries. That sentence stayed with me because boundaries were exactly what had disappeared from my life. For years, I had hoped respect would return naturally. It hadn't. Now boundaries would need to do the work that hope failed to accomplish. When we finished, Frank gathered several documents into a folder. Take these home. I shook my head. Not yet. The word home caught in my throat because I wasn't ready to call that place home anymore. Not until something changed. Frank understood immediately. Fair enough. Before leaving, I asked him something. Do you think I'm being cruel? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood and walked toward the window. Then he turned back. Let me ask you something. Okay. If Richard were sitting here, what would he say? That question hit me harder than anything else, because I knew exactly what my husband would say. Richard had been one of the gentlest men I'd ever known. Patient, kind, generous. But he also believed deeply in self-respect. I could almost hear his voice. Maggie, helping people doesn't mean surrendering your place in the world. My eyes filled unexpectedly. Frank saw it. There's your answer. The drive back to the motel felt different. The same roads, the same gray Ohio sky, yet everything seemed clearer. For years I'd been reacting, adjusting, compromising, enduring. Now for the first time I was making decisions. There is power in that. Not the power to control others. The power to stop abandoning yourself. That evening I sat alone in my motel room and watched the sunset through the window. My phone buzzed several times. Emily. Then Emily again. Then Kevin. I ignored them. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I needed space. For once their urgency did not become my responsibility. Around 7 o'clock Frank called. I've prepared everything. Everything. Yes. The notices. Yes. My stomach tightened. This was real now. No longer a conversation. No longer a possibility. A decision. You don't have to send them, Frank said. I know. Are you sure? I looked out at the fading sunlight. Then I remembered Kevin's voice. Go to your room, old woman. More importantly, I remembered Emily saying nothing. The silence. The acceptance. The years that had led to that moment. Yes, I said quietly. I'm sure. The next morning, certified envelopes left Frank's office. One addressed to Emily. One addressed to Kevin. Both entirely legal. Both entirely factual. Both impossible to ignore. As those envelopes began their journey through the postal system, I felt neither excitement nor satisfaction. Only calm. Because deep down, I knew the letters weren't really about property. They were about something much older. Something much more important. Respect. And for the first time in years, I had finally stopped giving mine away for free. At that exact moment, somewhere across town, Kevin was drinking coffee in my kitchen, completely unaware that everything was about to change. The certified letters arrived on a Thursday afternoon. I know exactly when they arrived because Emily called me 12 minutes later. I didn't answer. Not because I was trying to punish her, because I already knew what the conversation would be. It wouldn't be about the years of disrespect. It wouldn't be about the dinner table. It wouldn't be about the moment her husband ordered me to my room. It would be about the letters. And for once, I needed them to sit with the consequences before I rushed in to make everyone feel better. My phone rang 6 times that afternoon. Emily. Kevin. Emily again. Then Kevin twice in a row. Then Emily once more. I let every call go to voicemail. That evening, I listened to the messages. The first was from Emily. Mom, please call me. There has to be some misunderstanding. The second sounded more anxious. Mom, Frank's name is on these documents. Why would you do this? The third was from Kevin, and it told me everything I needed to know. This is ridiculous, Margaret. Call us immediately. Not Mrs. Carter. Not Margaret, can we talk? Not even an apology. Just outrage, as though I had violated some agreement. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so sad. The next morning I met Frank for breakfast. He was already sitting in a booth when I arrived, coffee in hand, legal folder beside him. Rough night, he asked. A little. Guilt. I smiled. Is it that obvious? Margaret, you're a mother. That was answer enough. Because mothers are experts at carrying guilt, even when we're not responsible. Especially when we're not responsible. I ordered eggs and toast. Then I looked across the table. Tell me honestly, how are they going to react? Frank took a sip of coffee. How would you react if someone spent years assuming they owned something that wasn't theirs? I already knew the answer. Poorly. And that turned out to be exactly what happened. By Friday afternoon, Kevin's confidence had started cracking. At first, he tried denial. According to Emily's voicemail, he insisted the notices couldn't be valid. There must be a mistake. Then came anger. Frank later told me he'd received 2 calls from Kevin. The first lasted 3 minutes. The second lasted less than 1. Apparently, Kevin didn't enjoy hearing legal facts, especially facts he couldn't argue with. By Saturday morning, denial had become panic because Kevin had started doing something he should have done years earlier. Reading the deed, the county records, the ownership documents, the insurance paperwork. Every document told the same story. My name. Only my name. For 3 years, he'd acted like the homeowner. Now reality was introducing itself. And reality wasn't impressed. That afternoon, Emily finally reached me. I answered because I could hear something different in her voice. Fear. Mom. Hello, Emily. She immediately began crying. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just exhausted crying. The kind that comes when a person finally realizes a problem won't disappear on its own. Mom, please. I closed my eyes. What do you need, sweetheart? Can we talk? We're talking now. A long pause followed. Then she asked the question she'd probably wanted to avoid. Are you really serious? I looked out the motel window. The parking lot was quiet. A couple was loading suitcases into a pickup truck. Life continued moving forward. Yes, I said. I am. Her crying became heavier. Mom, Kevin didn't mean... I stopped her gently. Don't. Silence. Please don't finish that sentence. For the first time in years, I heard my daughter become completely quiet. Not defensive. Not argumentative. Just quiet. Emily, I said softly. How many times have you said those words? She didn't answer. Kevin didn't mean it. Another silence. Kevin was stressed. Nothing. Kevin had a bad day. Still nothing. Kevin's under pressure. A shaky breath. Mom, do you know what hurts most? She started crying again. Number. It isn't what Kevin said. That surprised her. I could hear it. Then what is it? You already know. The line remained silent for several seconds. Then my daughter whispered something so softly I almost missed it. Because I didn't say anything. Yes. She broke down completely. And for the first time since leaving the house, I believed she finally understood. Not fully. Not yet. But enough to feel it. Enough to stop hiding from it. We spoke for nearly 40 minutes. The conversation was painful. Honest conversations usually are. For years, she'd convinced herself she was keeping peace, just like I had. Now she was beginning to realize that silence isn't always peace. Sometimes silence is permission, and permission accumulates. One ignored comment becomes another, then another, then another, until eventually someone feels comfortable saying the unthinkable at a dinner table. By Sunday, tension inside the house was reaching a breaking point. I know because Emily told me. Kevin was furious, not frightened anymore. Furious. The legal reality had finally sunk in, and he hated it. He spent the entire weekend alternating between blame and self-pity. According to Emily, he blamed me, then Frank, then lawyers, then the legal system, then stress, then circumstances, everyone except himself. At one point, he apparently shouted, "She can't do this to us." Emily surprised him. She already did. That was the first time she'd pushed back, and apparently it shocked him. Good. Sometimes reality arrives through paperwork. Sometimes it arrives through your spouse. Either way, it arrives. Sunday evening brought another surprise. A voicemail. From Kevin. Not angry. Not arrogant. Not demanding. For the first time uncertain. Margaret. He sounded tired. I think we need to meet. I listened twice. Not because it was persuasive. Because it was unfamiliar. The confidence was gone. The certainty was gone. For the first time, he sounded like a man discovering that actions have consequences. Monday morning, Frank called. He contacted me too. What did he say? He wants a meeting. I wasn't surprised. What do you think? Frank leaned into the phone. I think reality is finally getting his attention. I sat quietly, then asked the question that had been sitting in the back of my mind all weekend. Do you think he understands? Frank considered it. Number. Not yet. The answer didn't disappoint me, because understanding takes time, especially when pride is involved. What happens now, I asked. Frank's voice remained calm. Now he comes to you. And somehow hearing those 4 words sent a chill through me. Not because I was afraid. Because for years, I had always been the one walking toward conflict trying to fix it. Now the direction had changed. And very soon there would be a knock on a motel room door. A knock from a man who thought he controlled the situation. A man who still hadn't seen what was waiting on the other side. Tuesday morning arrived cold and gray. The kind of Ohio morning that makes the entire world look muted. I woke before sunrise. Not because I was nervous. Because old habits die hard. 26 years in the Army teaches your body to wake before the alarm. I made motel coffee. Sat near the window. and watched the parking lot slowly come to life. A delivery truck arrived. A family loaded luggage into a minivan. A maintenance worker swept leaves from the sidewalk. Ordinary things. Normal things. For some reason, they calmed me. Because what was happening in my life didn't feel ordinary. It felt like standing at the end of a long road and finally turning around to see where it had begun. Around 9:30, Frank arrived. He carried a leather briefcase and 2 cups of coffee. "You sleep. A little. You ready?" I smiled faintly. "I think so." Frank sat across from me. Unlike television lawyers, he wasn't dramatic. He wasn't interested in winning arguments. He simply liked facts. That was one reason I trusted him. Facts don't scream. Facts don't manipulate. Facts simply exist. We spent the next hour reviewing documents. The deed, the trust, property records, insurance documents. Everything neatly organized. Everything clear. Everything undeniable. At 10:42, my phone buzzed. A text from Emily. "Mom, he's coming." I stared at the message, then set the phone down. Frank looked up. "That him?" Yes. He nodded. Neither of us spoke. There wasn't much left to say. The facts were already sitting inside his briefcase. The decision had already been made. The only thing left was reality catching up. 20 minutes later, I saw Kevin's truck enter the parking lot. Even from the window, I could tell he was angry. He parked crookedly, got out quickly, slammed the door, started walking toward the motel. The old version of me would have panicked. The old version of me would have worried about keeping everyone comfortable. The old version of me would have found a way to apologize for upsetting him. That woman was gone. Not because I had become cruel, because I had finally become honest. The knock came exactly 30 seconds later. 3 hard hits. Bang, bang, bang. Demanding, impatient, confident. I stood. Frank remained seated, calm as ever. The knocking came again. "Margaret." His voice carried through the door. "Open the door." For a moment, I simply stood there, not afraid, just reflecting. 3 years. 3 years of small humiliations. 3 years of excuses. 3 years of pretending things would improve if I remained patient enough. Then I opened the door. Kevin took 1 step forward and stopped. His face changed instantly. The confidence disappeared. The anger disappeared. The certainty disappeared. Because he wasn't looking at an elderly woman sitting alone in a motel room. He was looking at me standing beside an attorney. And on the table behind us sat organized stacks of property records, legal documents, ownership documents, certified copies, facts, cold, clear facts. Kevin's face turned pale. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked completely unprepared. "Frank." Frank nodded politely. "Good morning, Kevin." The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. Kevin looked from Frank to me, then back to the documents. I could practically see the calculations happening inside his head. Every assumption he'd made during the last 3 years was collapsing, one after another. "Can I come in?" he finally asked. His voice sounded different, smaller. I stepped aside. Of course. He entered slowly. No swagger, no authority, no confidence. Just uncertainty. Frank gestured toward a chair. Kevin sat. For several moments, nobody spoke. Finally, Kevin looked at me. "Margaret." I raised a hand. "Before you say anything, I'd like you to listen." He nodded. I took a breath. Not because I was angry, because I wanted to be clear. "Do you know what bothers me most?" Kevin looked down. "Number. It isn't the letters." He remained silent. "It isn't the legal notice. Nothing. It isn't even what you said at dinner." His head lifted. Confusion crossed his face. "Then what is it?" I looked directly at him. "The fact that you thought you could say it." The room became very quiet. "Do you understand the difference?" He didn't answer. "You didn't lose your temper." I continued calmly. "You weren't joking." Still silence. "You genuinely believed you had the right to speak to me that way." Kevin swallowed. Hard. For the first time, he wasn't arguing. Because he couldn't. Deep down, he knew I was right. I continued. "You know what I've realized?" "What?" For years, I kept telling myself this house problem was about ownership. I shook my head. "It isn't." Frank watched quietly. Kevin stared at me. "Then what's it about?" "Respect." That single word seemed to hit harder than everything else. Because ownership can be debated. Respect cannot. Either it's present or it isn't. And for years it hadn't been. Kevin rubbed his face. The fight was leaving him. I could see it. What do you want me to say? The question surprised me. Not because he asked it, because he sounded sincere, tired, defeated, human, for the first time in a very long time. I thought carefully before answering. Then I said something that neither he nor Frank expected. I don't want you to say anything. Kevin blinked. What? I wanted you to understand. His eyes filled with confusion, then shame. Real shame. Not embarrassment. Not inconvenience. Shame. The kind that arrives when a person finally sees themselves clearly. You think I'm a bad person? The words came out quietly. I considered them. Number. That answer shocked him. I think you've spent years believing you're entitled to things you never earned. His shoulders dropped. Because that one landed. Hard. The room fell silent again. Finally, Kevin looked at the stack of documents, then at me, then down at his hands. And for the first time since this began, he said the words I'd expected days earlier. I'm sorry. Not defensive. Not qualified. Not followed by excuses. Just sorry. I believed he meant it. But I also knew something important. An apology isn't the end of accountability. It's the beginning of it. The conversation continued for another hour, calmly, respectfully, painfully. By the time Kevin left, he looked like a different man than the one who had walked through the motel door. Not fixed, not transformed, just humbled. As he reached the door, he stopped, turned around, and asked one final question. Is there any way to make this right? I looked at him for a long moment, then answered honestly, yes. His eyes lifted. How? Start by becoming the man Emily thinks you are. Kevin stared at me, then slowly nodded. And when he walked out of that room, I realized something. The legal papers had never been the real consequence. The real consequence was forcing him to face himself. And sometimes that's far harder than losing a house. After Kevin left the motel, I sat quietly for a long time. Frank packed his documents into his briefcase without speaking. He knew me well enough to recognize when I needed silence. Sometimes the most important moments aren't loud. They're quiet. Quiet enough for the truth to settle. Eventually, Frank stood. You okay? I nodded. I think so. You did well. I laughed softly. It doesn't feel like winning. Good, he replied. Because it isn't. That answer stayed with me after he left. It wasn't winning. It was correction. A course adjustment that should have happened years earlier. And like most overdue corrections, it was painful for everyone involved, especially Emily. Over the next 2 weeks, reality moved faster than emotion. The legal timeline continued. Move-out plans were discussed. Storage units were rented. Apartment applications were submitted. Practical life doesn't stop simply because people are hurting. I remained at the motel longer than necessary, partly because I wanted space. Partly because I knew Emily and Kevin needed space too. For years, we'd all been tangled together in unhealthy ways. Distance was allowing everyone to think more clearly. One afternoon, Emily called. Mom, hi, sweetheart. Can I see you? I hesitated only briefly. Of course. We agreed to meet at a small cafe near the river. The same cafe where Richard and I used to drink coffee on Saturday mornings. When I arrived, Emily was already there, and my heart broke a little. Because she looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. The kind of exhaustion that comes from finally facing something you've avoided for years. She stood when she saw me. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she wrapped her arms around me and started crying. I hugged her back. No speeches, no lectures, just a mother holding her daughter. After several minutes, we sat down. Emily stared into her coffee. I've been rehearsing this conversation for days. I smiled sadly. That usually means it's an important one. She nodded, then looked directly at me. I'm sorry. The words came immediately. No excuses, no explanations, no qualifications, just honesty. I know. She wiped her eyes. No, Mom, you don't understand. Her voice cracked. I've been apologizing for Kevin for years. I stayed quiet. I always told myself things weren't that bad. She shook her head. I kept convincing myself I was protecting everyone. The words sounded painfully familiar, because I'd done exactly the same thing. Do you know what I realized after you left? I waited. I wasn't protecting peace. A tear rolled down her cheek. I was protecting comfort. That sentence hit hard, because it was true. Comfort and peace often look similar, but they're not the same thing. Peace requires honesty. Comfort often requires avoidance, and avoidance had become the foundation of our family. Emily stared out the window. Dad would be disappointed in me. I felt a lump form in my throat. Your father loved you. I know. He'd still love you. She nodded. But he'd be disappointed. I couldn't argue, because she was right. Richard believed strongly in kindness, but he also believed in courage, especially moral courage. The courage to speak when remaining silent is easier. We spent nearly 2 hours talking. Really talking, perhaps for the first time since Richard died. Not about logistics, not about schedules, not about practical matters, about feelings, regrets, mistakes, truth. Emily admitted something that surprised me. After Dad died, I worried about you constantly. I blinked. What? I thought you were lonely? I smiled sadly. I was. I know. She looked down. And when Kevin and I moved in, I felt relieved. That made sense. I'd felt relieved too. Neither of us had realized the arrangement would slowly become unhealthy. Somewhere along the way, Emily continued, I stopped seeing you as the homeowner. The honesty stunned me. I started seeing you as part of the household. I nodded slowly. And Kevin, she sighed. Kevin started seeing himself as responsible for everything. There it was. Not an excuse, an explanation, an important difference. Kevin hadn't become arrogant overnight. He'd gradually slipped into a role nobody corrected, including him, including Emily, including me, especially me. When our conversation ended, Emily reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Can we fix this? I looked at her carefully. Some of it. Her eyes filled again. Trust takes longer than apologies. She nodded. And surprisingly, she didn't argue. Because maturity begins when people stop demanding immediate forgiveness. A few days later, Kevin requested another meeting. This time I agreed. We met at a public park, neutral ground. No lawyers, no documents, no tension-filled dining room, just 2 adults sitting on a bench overlooking a lake. Kevin looked different, not defeated, grounded, more honest somehow. I owe you an apology. You already apologized. He shook his head. Not completely. I waited. Then he said something I never expected. I don't think I realized how much I'd changed. The admission sounded genuine. After the business failed, he continued. I felt like a failure. For the first time, I began seeing the fear beneath his behavior. Fear doesn't excuse disrespect, but understanding fear helps explain it. I wanted control, he admitted. And your house became the one place where I felt important. The honesty surprised both of us, because once spoken aloud, it sounded exactly as unhealthy as it truly was. You know what's strange? Kevin asked. What? I kept acting like the house belonged to me. He laughed bitterly, even though deep down I knew it didn't. I looked at the lake. Small waves moved across the surface. Calm. Steady. Like life itself. Kevin. Yes, being afraid doesn't make you weak. He looked at me. Treating people badly because you're afraid does. His eyes dropped. Because he knew it was true. By the end of the conversation, I wasn't looking at a villain. I was looking at a flawed man. A proud man. A man who had allowed disappointment and insecurity to reshape his character. That realization didn't erase responsibility, but it did make forgiveness possible. Not immediate forgiveness. Not complete forgiveness. Possible forgiveness. And sometimes that's enough. A week later, Emily and Kevin signed a lease on a modest apartment across town. The move-out date was scheduled. The house would soon belong entirely to me again. But something else had happened too. For the first time in years, honesty had returned to our family. And honesty, unlike comfort, actually has a chance to heal things. The house felt strange after Emily and Kevin moved out. Not empty, just quiet. A different kind of quiet. For 3 years, every room had been filled with activity. Voices, televisions, phone calls, arguments, footsteps. Now there was space again. The first morning I woke up in my own bedroom after returning home, I lay still and listened. Nothing. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator downstairs and birds singing outside the window. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed silence. I walked through the house slowly, not because I was inspecting it, because I was reconnecting with it. Every room carried memories. The living room where Richard and I spent countless evenings. The dining room where Emily celebrated birthdays. The kitchen where family traditions began. For years, I'd been living in those spaces without truly inhabiting them. Now they felt mine again. Not because other people were gone, because I had stopped abandoning myself. That was the real change. A week later, I found Richard's old reading chair in storage, the same chair Kevin had removed years earlier. I brought it back into the living room myself. When I placed it beside the window, I stood there for a long moment. Then I smiled. It wasn't really about the chair. It was about reclaiming pieces of my life I'd quietly surrendered, one by one, little by little. Just as I'd lost them, summer arrived gradually. The trees outside turned green. The neighborhood children rode bicycles through the streets. Life continued doing what life always does, moving forward. One afternoon, Emily stopped by unexpectedly. She wasn't carrying boxes. She wasn't asking for anything. She simply wanted to visit. That alone felt like progress. We sat on the back porch drinking iced tea, the same porch where she'd done homework as a teenager, the same porch where Richard taught her how to throw a baseball. Some places seemed to encourage honesty. This was one of them. "You seem happier," she said. I looked across the yard. "I think I am." She nodded. I can tell. A comfortable silence settled between us, something we hadn't shared in years. Eventually, she spoke again. "Kevin's changing." I turned toward her. "How?" She smiled softly. "He listens more." That made me laugh. A useful skill, very useful. We both smiled. Then Emily became serious. "He talks about that day all the time." I knew exactly which day she meant. The motel. The legal papers. The moment everything shifted. What does he say? He says it was the first time he realized nobody owed him anything. I thought about that, then nodded. Because that lesson arrives late for some people. But late is still better than never. Several weeks later, Kevin called. Not because there was a problem, not because he wanted something, simply to invite me to dinner. The invitation surprised me, especially when he added something else. "You can say no." I laughed. "Thank you for the permission. I deserve that." "Yes, you do." For the first time in a very long while, the conversation felt natural. Not forced, not tense, human. I accepted. The apartment was modest. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, a tiny balcony. Nothing luxurious. But when I arrived, something felt different. Responsibility, ownership, pride. Not ownership of property, ownership of their lives. Kevin met me at the door, and for a moment we simply looked at each other. Then he surprised me. "Thank you for coming." A simple sentence. Yet 3 years earlier, I don't think he would have said it. Growth often reveals itself through small things. The dinner itself was pleasant. Nothing dramatic happened. No emotional speeches. No grand declarations. Just family sharing a meal. Honestly, that made it more meaningful. Real life rarely resolves itself through dramatic moments. It heals through consistency, through changed behavior, through time. As the months passed, those small changes continued. Emily called more often, not because she needed help, because she wanted connection. Kevin became more thoughtful, more aware, more respectful. Not perfect. Nobody is, but noticeably different. One autumn afternoon, nearly 6 months after I walked out of my own dining room, Kevin asked if we could talk privately. We sat on my back porch, the same place where Emily and I had shared iced tea. He looked nervous, which immediately made me curious. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." That answer usually means something is wrong. He laughed, then became serious. "I owe you one more apology." I waited. He stared at the yard. "When I moved into your house, I was embarrassed." The admission surprised me. Embarrassed. I felt like I'd failed. I listened quietly. My business collapsed. He shook his head. I couldn't provide the way I wanted to. The old shame was still there. Less powerful now, but still present. And instead of dealing with that, honestly, I started acting important. He looked directly at me. "Your house became the place where I pretended I was in control." The honesty moved me, not because it excused what happened, because it acknowledged it, truthfully, without blame, without justification, without hiding. I hurt you. His voice softened. And I hurt Emily. I nodded. Yes. A long silence followed. Then he asked, "Do you forgive me?" I thought carefully before answering, because forgiveness deserves honesty too. Yes. His eyes widened slightly. Really? Yes. I smiled. But forgiveness isn't forgetting. He nodded immediately. I know. And it doesn't erase consequences. I know that too. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said something that surprised even me. Richard would have liked this version of you better. Kevin's eyes filled with tears. He looked away. And for the first time since I'd known him, I saw genuine humility. Not weakness. Humility. There is a difference. The following Christmas, our family gathered in my house. Not because anyone was entitled to be there, because they were invited. A surprisingly important distinction. Emily helped in the kitchen. Kevin carried dishes. Grandchildren laughed in the living room. And at one point, I caught myself looking around the room and smiling. Not because everything was perfect. Because it wasn't. Families never are. But respect had returned. And once respect returns, healing becomes possible. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone in Richard's chair. Snow was falling outside. The house was quiet, peaceful. Home. I thought about the night I walked out. The rain. The motel. The heartbreak. The uncertainty. At the time, it felt like something was ending. In reality, something healthier was beginning. If this story reminds you of someone in your own life, remember this. Love and self-respect can exist together. Helping family is a beautiful thing, but kindness should never require you to surrender your dignity. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for the people you care about is finally establish the boundary you've been avoiding. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need the reminder. And if you'd like more stories about family resilience, forgiveness, and second chances, I'd be honored to have you join me again. Thank you for listening.